Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all okay. It's a bit colder today, isn't it? As you know, for the last couple of weeks, we were talking about the beginnings of Spand, and I told you I would try and give you some sort of history of what had happened. And last time we saw the beginnings of Spand from 1976 up to 1980, and the starting up of groups in Nottingham, Loughborough and Scunthorpe, the opening of the office at the invitation of Father Owen O'Neill, of course, whose funeral, as we know, took place last Monday. That was in West Bridgford. The arrival of Sister Madeleine Campion to begin work with physically disabled people in the diocese. And in May of 1980, they had, those of you who may remember, a National Pastoral Congress in Liverpool. And we asked Margaret Dobbin to go and represent us. So a few bishops were told some home truths about what they had failed to do for people with disabling conditions, and rightly so too. In June, our Loughborough group held their first care day for a small number of people in Father Brian's presbytery in Colville. That was the first time that had happened. And at the same time, the Nottingham and Loughborough groups went to a Faith and Light celebration day at Lincoln Cathedral, and the retreat day at Loughborough Convent took place in the summer, in July, with 100 people from groups in Nottingham, Loughborough, Alfreton, Leicester and Sheffield. The National Faith and Light Week took place in Glastonbury that year, and our Nottingham group were represented. And then the first official meeting of the Scunthorpe group took place in September. They had been in existence for about a year, but this was the first formal occasion when they all got together. And then Sister Madeleine Dunphy, who was the Loretto sister who came to start the club in Aspley, was moved from Nottingham to take responsibility for the Loretto Conference Centre in Llandudno. Not wanting to lose touch with people she'd come to care for, she invited us to come and spend Easter week there with her, and we've been doing so for 39 years ever since, only interrupted on our 40th because of COVID-19, of course, so hopefully we'll be able to get back to that next year, but it's been a wonderful, wonderful tradition. So by October, after Sister Madeleine left, Sister Eileen McConnell came, and by October there were groups regularly meeting in Loughborough, Scunthorpe, Nottingham, and periodically in Leicester. And like so many things, a chance conversation occasions a huge development. And that's what had happened, of course, when I met Sister Andrew, or later Sister Bernadette, in Mount St Bernard Abbey in 1977, as I told you last time, which occasioned the beginning of the Loretto Thursday Club in their convent. And in the summer of 1980, I was working with some of the young people at the Beckett School, where I was the chaplain, at an international regatta at the National Water Sports Centre. We were in charge of manning the start. I taught some of them rowing very badly, as it had been a big part of my life when I was there as a pupil 11 years before. You will not believe this, dear friends. You will not believe this, but it is true that I was in those days rather small and rather thin. So much so that for 3 years I was the cox of the school first eight, and because I was too small to row. Then I started rowing in my last year, so I knew you'd enjoy that. But anyway, we were there at the Water Sports Centre, and every year when the national championships or international events came, we had a very good sculler called Damien Hessian. He was very, very talented, but he kept getting beaten every year by this brute of a teenager whose name was Stephen Redgrave. And you all know who he is. So on the towpath that July, I was chatting to a friend from the parish, Mr. Chris Theobald, who happened to be at the time the promotions manager for the local commercial radio station, Radio Trent. And we were looking at the course, and I said, do you know what, Chris? We could do a sponsored walk round here for the International Year of Disabled next year, and your station could help organise it. We could call it the Trent Walk, if you like. In principle, he agreed, not knowing what he was committing himself to, and thus the Trent Walk was born. we could never have known at that time just how big it would become. Shortly afterwards, about that time, the Loughborough group went on their first trip as Group 124 with HCPT to Lourdes at Easter, and in so doing, set up a new and very welcome precedent, namely not only bringing children with disabling conditions or physically disabled conditions as it had been, but also those with learning difficulties and also their parents. Some reason HCPT had discouraged this, but clearly it was a very important thing, and our Loughborough group were the first ones to do it, and thereafter HCPT changed their minds. In another first that year, the Loretto Club mimed the story of the Passion at the Cathedral Hall in Nottingham, with Stephen Peat as Jesus, Paul Martin as Peter, and Bishop James came along and he was speechless. Now that there is a thing for Bishop James to be speechless, but he was speechless at the sheer power of the presentation and how it brought that familiar story to life. We used all sorts of different music as a background, mainly from the music of the Breton harpist Alan Stivell. And again, no one had ever seen anything like this before. Those supposedly in need of our help had in fact become the preachers of the gospel. And this ministry of preaching the gospel continues right up to the present as an essential part of the mission of Spand. On the May Day bank holidays that year, 2 more initiatives took place. Ken Dignon took some of the Nottingham group to Ipswich for the weekend, and our Care Day took place at Nottingham, at Tollerton Garden Fete, what was at one point the junior seminary. And it was just a school at that stage, and we would go there on the last bank holiday in May for some years until it shut about 5 or 6 years later. And then, after much preparation and working in the dark, the Trent Walk actually took place on the 15th of May, 1981. 26.5 miles over the south and east and centre of Nottingham, with 5 stopping points en route. We had planned this without any idea what we were really doing, but fortunately we had quite a lot of support. I pushed our secretary Kathleen for the first of the 9 times we did it together, and there was 545 people taking part and a huge amount of help. 20 charities working with disabled people were involved, most of them humble and unknown. This, of course, was before the days of the mega events like the London Marathon, and also before many charities have effectively become businesses, which is a great source of sorrow to me. These charities were all local and covered such activities as riding for disabled people, supporting people with multiple sclerosis or cerebral palsy, or Huntington's Career, and the work of the Cheshire Home, the Red Cross, many others, including, of course, our own. Some local parishes were heavily involved in this, particularly the Holy Spirit at West Bridgford and Sacred Heart in Carlton, and the walk ended in the early morning at the YMCA in the middle of the city. It was a wonderful occasion and raised over £16,000 for the charities involved, which in 1981 was an awful lot of money. We were all exhausted, sore, but very happy, and the project gained the agency huge respect with the other charities. We would do this 10 times over the next 18 years, the last 5 of which were boosted by the incredible contribution of Our Lady of Lourdes Parish in Mickletover, most of whom had no idea about Nottingham or places like Burton Joyce or Carlton Hill. We could know nothing of this on that first occasion, much of which was broadcast live during the night on Radio Trent, and thankfully it took place before the days of risk assessment and health and safety overtook us. Pushing my friend Kathleen up Carlton Hill towards the end of the walk was sheer torture, and especially as she smoked, and the smoke floated over the chair back into my lungs, and it was awful. And as time went on, we established 3 walks over the distances of 7.5 miles, 13.5 miles, and the full distance of 26.5. This enabled more people to take part, including many people from Spand itself. And awards were given out at the presentation ceremony in the summer after the walk, and Stephen Peat always won the award for the sponsorship of the 7.5 mile event. And in those 10 Trent Walks, £300,000 was raised for the charities involved. And here was another example of Spand reaching out to people, helping others rather than being helped, becoming the contributors as we've always seen ourselves as being. I have the fondest memories of the Trent Walk, and so do many of us, and we're all glad that we took part in it. In July of that year, 1981, the Loughborough Group again hosted a retreat day and will continue to do so for many years before the event moved to Scunthorpe. Their leaders met regularly on Sunday evenings at the home of the University Chaplain to plan an ambitious series of activities, which would include another visit to Lourdes with HCPT at Easter 1982. Then it was announced that in May 1982, Pope John Paul would be coming to Britain and have a significant few days among us. A huge preparation a programme of preparation began, much of it centring on the office at Collick Road, where we were given the responsibility by Bishop James of caring for 350 disabled people at each of the events at Southwark Cathedral and Coventry Airport. Without the help of the Catholic Children's Society, none of this could ever have taken place. Hugh Williams, the beloved son of John and Audrey, had died aged 29 in April 1981. His mother was in particular lost without him. And when I asked her if she might come and help us to do the work to prepare for the Pope's visit, she kindly agreed and said afterwards that it had unwittingly helped her to come to terms with her grief. Tickets and security passes had to be found for everyone, and people from all over the diocese with disabling conditions and their families were invited. It was truly a mammoth task, with the phones continually going off at Collick Road and the staff very kindly answering them for us. The Pope was to celebrate 7 sacraments in 7 venues, and the Southwark Event was where he would celebrate the anointing of the sick. It was a brilliantly organised occasion by Father Patrick Kearney of the Southwark Diocese. The cathedral was emptied of seats so that stretchers and wheelchairs could be put there, and the car park was vacated with a huge marquee put up to accommodate 3,000 guests. The people on stretchers were lined up in the nave, and each diocese had to choose one person to be anointed by the Pope. At that time, there was a lovely nun in the convent in Loughborough called Sister Anastasia, who spent most of her life and ministry in the sacristy, looking after the vestments and all those items that needed to be prepared for Mass in a very quiet and anonymous way, and nothing ever really special had ever happened to her. She developed cancer and was nearing the end of her life, and so we took her on the Jumbulance to Southwark, which she absolutely loved. And there were other people coming on coaches, and 8 other people came on the Jumbulance, including a wonderful man called Big Jim Selby, who some of you might even remember. He was a 26-stone ex-wrestler who'd injured himself permanently in the ring and was now disabled. He lived in a council flat in Bilborough and was visited regularly by the Loretto sisters. It took 6 of us to get him out of his house on a huge blanket because he was so heavy, and there was you couldn't go into the house without having to turn left. So it was absolutely amazing. And I got there at 6 o'clock in the morning and said, "Right, Jim, we're ready." "Oh, I'm not ready yet." I said, "You've got 5 minutes, otherwise we're leaving you." So he suddenly got himself organised. But you will remember Big Jim and his friend, his wonderful friend, Ray Lloyd, who was the chief brancardier for the Lourdes Diocesan Pilgrimage for many, many years. And Ray bought this old bus, took the back out, put a lift in it, and so that he could take Jim and his friends around the place. They used to call this bus Salve Regina, And whenever we had an event, we'd never know whether it would actually arrive or not, because often it broke down. But that was a wonderful thing that Ray did for so many people for so long, including Big Jim. And Big Jim, he had this propensity to sort of guffaw out loud in the middle of Mass. And so we got him into Southwark, got him down there, and before the Pope came, I went over to him and very quietly whispered in his ear, "If you make a single noise while this Pope is here, I will personally come over and strangle you." And he said, "All right, Father." And Julie kept quiet. Sister Anastasia's own sister had come from Wales to be with her, and they were placed in the cathedral with Audrey looking after them. Just before the Pope arrived, I went down to see her and told her that she was the one chosen to be anointed by the Pope. Her face was full of shock and sheer joy. So was Audrey's. It was a magical moment, and so pleasing to be able to do something special for a person who devoted so much of her life quietly and unselfishly in the Lord's service. She was floating on air afterwards, as the other sisters said, and died 6 weeks later, a very happy lady. The Southwark event was truly incredible. And it was there that I came face to face with a woman who had been pestering me on the phone for weeks to get tickets from a group of people from her parish. Her name, Mary Forrian. Her parish, St. Peter's, Hinckley. And so in the cloisters of Southwark Cathedral, after the Pope had gone, when I saw all these people from Hinckley with Mary, I suggested to her that she should form an agency group that could meet regularly. Instead of just coming to odd events like that. She agreed, and so as a result, on that day, the 28th of May 1982, the Hinckley Sunshine Group was born. 2 days later, we gathered at Coventry Airport for what, in comparison to Southwark, was a very poorly organised event. Huge crowds were expected initially, and then they discouraged them from coming because they thought there might be too many. People were told to be in place in the airport by midnight, even though the Pope wasn't due to start Mass until late in the morning. The facilities for people with disabilities were truly awful. Everyone from our groups had to have a pass, which was not finally issued until the week before, and they were nowhere near the Pope and nowhere near the toilets. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Jim Dobbin and I set off in a coach full of elderly and infirm people, many of whom came from Nazareth House. We got there without any problems because everyone else was in there already, and we settled them all down while I went off to get dressed for Mass. Jim used to always say that he saw a miracle happening under his own eyes when these frail, timid old people sitting in their chairs suddenly jumped up when the Pope came, and Jim said, "God, they're all cured," he said. And it was one of those very strange occasions. And then it got worse when we were leaving. I was at the front of the queue and he was at the back, and we gently frog marched all these people out of the airport to get to the bus so that we'd be on the bus first and away. But on the way, we passed a Red Cross tent, and one old lady, she just staggered a bit, felt a bit faint. That was the invitation to the Red Cross to have a patient. So they just grabbed her like this, put her in an ambulance and took her to a field hospital right the other side of the airport, and nobody knew where she'd gone. And it was hours before we found her, so in the end, we were actually the last to leave, not the first. For all this, though, the Pope's visit was a great fillip for all the country and a never-to-be-forgotten occasion for all of us. We commemorated it with 500 people and in the annual Mass at Clifton, and wrote him a letter from the group thanking him for coming. That evening, 200 people stayed for supper with Mrs. Vera Murphy I don't know how she ever did it. And then the next day, 100 people, having stayed overnight in various places, gathered at Tollerton for a brilliant lunch provided by the UCM at Keyworth, who were to continue to offer hospitality on this weekend to us for over 30 years. Other events took place that year. 52 people went to Llandudno at Easter when there were only supposed to be 35. Sister Madeline didn't tell any of the other nuns. Next year there was 64, I think, went. The Faith and Light celebration took place again at Ipswich with people from Loughborough, Nottingham and Derby. And then the following year, 1983, Ken Dignon organised the Faith and Light celebration at Trinity School in Nottingham with lots of help from our group, including a very keen young man called Simon Brittle, who, of course, you will know is now the chairman of the agency. The second Trent Walk took place in the middle of the night. Father Brian was walking in some godforsaken place outside Nottingham when he heard the sound of a minibus approaching. He stretched out his hand like that, and the gentleman in the minibus, one Jim Dobbin, placed in his hand a glass of high-quality red wine. And so that was a wonderful thing. He just put his hand out and the wine came into his hand. It was marvellous, marvellous. In Scunthorpe that year, Sister Bernadette was moved to Gloucester and Sister Perpetua took over, and the Loughborough group got a new minibus, while the Loreto group got 2 second-hand vehicles kindly donated by a lovely lady called Kathleen Slater, and this meant that we could expand our activities with various people. Sisters Eileen and Maura were moved from Loreto to Altrincham, and the great Sister Dimpner arrived. The following year in Nottingham, we encountered Mr. Brian Clough for the first time, and he gave us a wheelchair and the benefit of his wisdom in his office at Nottingham Forest Football Club. Sister Mary David retired as the head of St Mary's School in Loughborough, where she'd been the head for over 30 years, teaching me, or trying to teach me when I was a boy, and having received the richly deserved Benny Merenti Medal. She sadly left us. We were very upset about it, but she went to work in Rugby and became the chaplain to Onley Prison, where she did the most remarkable thing. She set up a group of people with learning difficulties inside the prison. She used to take the group inside the prison so that the prisoners could work with them. It's just amazing. Nobody had ever done anything like that before, or even thought of it. Sister Madeline Campion was given an office at St Peter's, Leicester, for her work, which continued to flourish. In the spring, the Loreto Club began monthly Sunday evenings at swimming at the Portland Leisure Centre, and later that year, our friend, the great folk singer Vin Garbett, came and did a charity concert for us there. Many of the group liked running, especially Tony Wheat, Adam Sayers and Tony Strickland, and they took part in the Nottingham Half Marathon and organised what they called a Portland Christmas Trot on Boxing Day, which raised over £500. We celebrated a Passover meal together in Aspley and took part in the Deanery Station Mass in Clifton. But the highlight of 1985 was when we were invited to contribute to a special Mass with 3,000 young people and Cardinal Hume at De Montfort Hall in Leicester. Our Loreto group mimed the Gospel, and the Cardinal was speechless with admiration. No one had ever done anything like this before. In the October of 1985, the Derby Tuesday Club was officially born, with Martin and Gillian von Fragstein, Margaret Barrow and Father Greg Tobin meeting regularly at Highfields Convent, taking on the work of the much-loved CHCF group. So I hope I'm not boring you with all this information and anecdotes, but I'm anxious to demonstrate the sheer scale of the development and the work of Spand from that bedroom in Sheffield in 1976, and the contribution and vision of so many brilliant people in many different places to enable this to happen. I'm certain that the good Lord was with us and remains with us to this day. Otherwise, none of these amazing things could ever have taken place. The phrase that was to become something of a mantra for us, "No one has ever done anything like this before," was a source of great joy, pride and satisfaction, and is still. No one had ever done anything like the Loughborough group, taking parents and children with learning difficulties to Lourdes with HCPT. No one had ever mined the scriptures to music, as in the Cathedral Hall in Nottingham and De Montfort Hall in Leicester with the Cardinal. No one had ever thought of care days, retreat days, or something like the Trent Walk. There had never been a faith and light celebration before, and no one had ever set up a group for young people with disabling conditions inside a prison. Discovering new things about the abilities of our friends has always been a great delight. I'll never forget one day when a young man from Nottingham, Sean Pearson, who hardly ever spoke except to say night, night, responded to a direct question from me in the car one evening and nearly ran me off the road in so doing. And at a care day at the park with the Augustinian fathers, this autistic boy was playing with matches and trying to make them into words on the floor. When we worked out what he was doing, we saw that he had written quite clearly, but backwards and upside down, 2 words: Nottingham University. And similarly, one bank holiday after a day at Woollerton Park, we went back to Jim and Margaret's for a big feed, and some people were playing snooker. Francesca McNulty took great interest and named all the colours in sequence. It's an amazing thing. And then finally, a lovely lady from Derby, Alison Lydiot, who is blind and has various other difficulties. One evening in Ludlow, we discovered by accident that she could actually play the piano. And so we encouraged her to play it more often. And these discoveries of what have always spurred us on and given us the encouragement to persevere and to search for hidden abilities and talents among everyone. There were lots of what had now become frequent events taking place in 1985, club nights, faith and light celebrations in Ireland and Scotland, where some people from Nottingham went to take part, another Trent Walk, trips, holidays and care days. But the year ahead, 1986, was to be another very special one for all of us, and I'll tell you about it next week.